Welcome back to Hudson Appliance for another episode of Wicked Good Food. I'm your host, Matt Williams, and today is all about my neighbor's apples. So the other day, my daughter and I were walking up and down our road, and there were a couple beautiful apples that had actually rolled into our yard. I picked one up and ate it. It was fantastic. So she went up, my daughter did, and asked our neighbor, who has a daughter who's Lily, who's only 3 years old as well, and said, "Can we have some apples?" She wasn't quite so elegant. She wanted to go up there and ring the ding dong, which I thought was hilarious. But she rang the doorbell, and we asked if we could have apples. And we picked up probably 4 times as many apples as you see here off the ground. And some of them were a little bit beat up, but most of them were beautiful. A couple had some little marks on them, but don't worry about eating apples with marks on it. If there's a wormhole in there, I'm not going to throw it away actually, but I'm going to cut it first and make sure I don't eat a worm. But the vast majority of the apple's good. So these are all, they might have the little blemishes on them, but they're great. So that was kind of the inspiration for today's show. So what we're going to make is we're going to take, and we have some beautiful pork chops here that we're going to take out of this nice apple cider brine, sear in a pan, pull those out. We're actually going to put some onions and apples in to cook with some of the pork juices, roast that all together with a little bit of bourbon. And then we're going to make some cream spinach and some roasted potatoes. But to start us off, we're going to make the classic Waldorf salad that uses a bunch of different apples. First thing we're going to do is take our pork chops. So these are a beautiful center cut pork chop, bone in, that has not been trimmed all that much. So we have this real nice layer of fat, couple layers of fat over this nice lean meat. So I'm going to take 2 of these, just place them here. And so, like I said, it was an apple cider brine. So I dissolved some kosher salt in some fresh apple cider and let these sit in there for a few hours. If you could do overnight, but I would be careful not adding quite as much salt. But I have them on this paper towel here because I want to get a nice sear on them. I'm going to take another paper towel and just dab the top of them, like so. Anytime you want to sear something or get color on something, you always want to try to make sure it's as dry as possible. So now I'm going to add a little bit of pepper, fresh ground black pepper, a generous pinch of salt on top. And these are going to go into my preheated cast iron skillet. Now, if I were working behind me on the stove with the hood on it, I would have this pan cranking as hot as it could possibly go. I don't want a smoke show here. So this is on medium-high heat. I want to be careful I don't smoke us out or set off the fire alarms. So we're going to let those just sit. In the meantime, we're going to take an onion and we're going to cut this up. As always, the root end's here. There's your stem end. We're going to cut the stem end off. Cut this in half. And actually, for what we're going to do, I'm going to cut off the root end as well. Peel this half onion. So we get half of our onion there, and I'll do the same with the other half. Now, apples are one of those things that we grow up with. They're all around us, almost wherever you live in the world. They've been cultivated on this planet for over 3,000 years, believe it or not. And there's over 7,000 different varieties of apples, which blows my mind. But just think about when you go into the market. Let me take a peek, just see how quick this is going. A little bit of color. Not worried about it yet. But you go into the market and there might be 3, 4, 6, 8, 10, 15 different varieties of apples. I always had trouble with that. I'm not very good at knowing which apple is best for what. But there are a couple rules that you can follow to help you figure it out. So essentially they break down into 2 categories. You have dense apples and you have ones that are kind of airy. The dense ones are the ones that are going to hold up their shape a little better. And you can tell when you bite into it or cut into it that it's denser. The other thing you can think about is the acidity of the apple. Generally, you bite into an apple and it's really tart. That's another one that's going to hold up well when you cook it. The higher the acidity, and you can tell by going ahead and biting into them, it's going to hold up a little bit better. So as you're thinking about what you're going to do, I'm going to turn that down just a bit. With the apples you get, go ahead and taste one. I actually don't know what variety apples these are. I have no idea. I could make a guess, but they're moderately tart and they're relatively firm. So they're going to be perfect for what we're going to do. I'm going to take this onion, cut it in relatively big pieces. Same thing with this half onion. This is ready to turn. I can smell it. Nice brown color on there. When you're brining something, if you add something like apple cider to it, you want to think about that added sugar. It's going to make something brown a little more quickly. You don't have to use apple cider. You could use canned apple juice, which actually probably has more sugar in it, or you could just use water with salt. But I'm a big fan of, in particular, pork, always brining it. So I'm going to take a couple of these apples, give a quick peel. But like I was saying, even apples that are the same variety can oftentimes have a different flavor, have different textures to them, even if they're grown just at a neighboring orchard. So it's always a good idea if you're making a pie or something that you're not quite sure of the apple, that you kind of vary the types of apples. That way you can be sure you get some that are there for texture and some that might be a little sweeter or less tart for some flavor. All right. Now I want to take another peek here. Oh, this is awesome. Now once again, I wish you could smell this because we're getting a great, great pork smell, and it's a little sweet from the apple cider that was on there. I'm going to take these apples and just kind of roughly cut them, cutting around the core. And then from here, I just want to cut them in a little bit smaller pieces. So just a couple cuts. I want these to hold together. I don't want them super small. We're not going for an applesauce type thing. We still want chunks when we're all done. And you'll notice there's a couple little pieces of skin on there. I'm not worried about it. It's all right. If you have a monster one, you know, you notice one like this that you don't want, we can just trim it right off. All right, and that looks good. So we've got our apples and onions all cut. I'm going to grab my plate here. So now I'm going to take out these beautifully seared pork chops and just stick them on this plate for right now. So now at this point, we have some of the fat and some of the stuff that's crusted onto the pan, some of the fond from these pork chops. Now our apples are going to go right in here. Those are onions. These are apples. Trust me, I know what I'm talking about. All right. And we're going to let these sit and just get a little color. I'm going to put a little knob of butter in there, just because why not? I don't want too much, though, because I don't want them to get greasy at this point. So we're going to let this cook for a couple minutes, get a little brown. When we come back, I'll show you how they're brown and then what the next step is to get on with cooking our pork chops. All right, so we've taken some time. We've got a little bit of color on our apples, a little bit of color on our onions there. I want to get our potatoes going. This is one of the simplest things we've ever done on Wicked Good Food, actually. We're going to dump these pre-washed little baby potatoes, on here. I'm going to drizzle a little bit of vegetable oil over the top of them. Hit it with a generous salt. A lot of this is falling off on the pan. And some pepper. This is just going to be a side dish, an accompaniment going on with our pork. I just want to roll them like that to make sure they got all coated with the salt and pepper and a little bit of oil. Pop these in the oven. So I'm really happy with what's going on here. Once again, incredible, incredible smell. I want to take some of this fresh thyme, and I'm going to take, I don't know, this 5 or 6 small sprigs of thyme, throw those in there, mix that around a little bit. We're going to add some bourbon. It's about 3 ounces of bourbon, 4 ounces of bourbon, sure. Go ahead and take my nicely seared pork chops, put these right on top, just like that. Any juices that are on here, I want to make sure that these end up in, because that's all great flavor. Then we go ahead and throw this in our oven. We're just going to let that go. I want to keep a little bit of an eye on it. If it starts that our pork chops are getting browner than I want, I don't think that's going to happen, but I can always tent it with a little bit of foil. Now, let's talk about our Waldorf salad. So Waldorf salad, we're going to use a couple varieties of apple here. I picked the nicer looking ones here. This one is a little bit beat up, but we'll trim that part off that we're not going to use. And what we're going to do is take our apples, and just like we did before, I wash these off a little bit before. It's always a good idea to wash any produce you get. And I'm going to cut them like I did before. I'm going to cut around the core. So you can see this one here. I missed part of the core, so we'll just trim that part off. So this is a famous salad that was actually invented at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York City. It was back in the 1890s, I believe, so it's been around for 120 plus years. And it was originally a very simple salad, and it still is a very simple salad, but it had apples and mayonnaise and celery. That was it. That was it. Nuts later became common in them, and we're going to use some nuts today. Found another little soft spot. I'm just going to trim that off. I'm going to take our apples as I cut them and just put them in here in a bowl. Same thing here. And so now you can see that these apples were much different in size. So this is a lot bigger. This would be a little unwieldy to eat depending on what you're looking for. So I'm actually going to take this and I'm going to cut it in half like this before I cut it into the smaller bits. Now it's personal preference what size you want the apples to be, what shape you want them to be, but you want them to be consistent so that it's the same, essentially the same crunch throughout your salad. Another way you can tell if an apple is a higher acid apple is by cutting it and letting it sit out. You'll notice the ones that are higher in acidity don't turn brown nearly as fast or at all compared to others. So we've already got a nice little mix of color. So the next ingredient that I forgot to bring over here is a little bit of cider vinegar. Now, I'm going to put it, maybe a tablespoon. Many recipes will call for lemon juice. Almost all recipes call for some sort of an acid. The acid plays a really important role in helping to make your apples not brown, but it also, you're going to remember that we're going to making essentially a salad dressing that's going to go on here, and so adding that is going to be the acidity for our dressing. So I'm just going to give this a quick toss. Stick them off to the side while we work on some of our other prep here. So I'm going to take our celery, which has been washed. I haven't trimmed it yet, so I'm just going to trim the ends off. A lot of people throw away this part here, the celery, but this is just as good as the rest, and it's great for dicing up real small. I'm not going to use it today because we're the way I'm going to cut it, but don't get rid of this part, or the leaves. The leaves are awesome in a salad. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to cut it on a real steep bias, which just means I'm going to cut it at an angle. And this is going to add another level of texture. So we're going to get some crunchiness from our apples, and we're also going to get some crunchiness, excuse me, from our celery going in there. That's probably good. So this can go right in. All right, we're going to go ahead and put a little sprinkle of salt on there, and then we're going to put in some mayonnaise. So the mayonnaise is what functions as a dressing. Thank you, sir. Come on up and give a wave. All right, so there's Josh. So we're going to toss this together now, making sure we go all the way down to the bottom because we want to incorporate all that vinegar we put in there. And this traditionally has a fair amount of mayonnaise in it. If you like it a little less mayonnaisey, which I do actually, add a little less mayonnaise. Once again, you're cooking for yourself. Cook to your own taste. Don't worry about what a recipe says. Do what you want. All right. So the next thing we're going to add are our walnuts. So I have some walnuts here that are chopped up. I'm going to add these to them. Now, if you love walnuts, add a bunch of walnuts. I love walnuts in here. I like that they're a little bit bitter, and I'm going to put them all in. And I like the contrast that brings with the sweetness of the apple. And remember, always taste as you go. So I'm going to grab one of these apples and just see what I think of the dressing. It's good, but I actually think I want a little more acidity. Put a few more drops of vinegar in there. So I'm going to clean up my mess, pop this in the fridge. We want it to sit around for a little while in the refrigerator to kind of let all these tastes mingle together. Then when we get back, we're going to go ahead and make our creamed spinach. All right, so I cleaned up my mess a little bit. I actually had a few more pieces of apple here. I cut them up and threw them in our Waldorf salad. It was a little bit mayonnaisey for my taste, but it's beautiful, hanging out in the refrigerator right now. Next thing I'm going to do, I have a preheated pan. It's just a little bit preheated. I'm going to add a little bit of water to it, and I'm going to add this spinach to it. Now this spinach is washed and trimmed already. It's baby spinach. It's not like the big spinach, the massive leaves of spinach where you have to go through and pull out all the stems. I'm going to throw a cover on this. And what we're looking to do here is we're going to start making our creamed spinach. Spinach, like most greens or like lettuces, is mostly water. We want to get a lot of that water out of there so that when we add our cream to it, most of the sauce there is cream rather than water. So we're going to let that wilt down, and then we're going to strain it. But we'll get to that in a minute. A couple of things that are going to go into our creamed spinach. A little bit of nutmeg. So I have some fresh nutmeg here. I'll show you how we grate that up. I've got some real Parmigiano-Reggiano cheese that we're going to add to it. I've got a shallot, and I've got some onion. So I'm going to go ahead and cut some of this onion. Move this out of the way. So now for this, I want to make sure that our onion is pretty fine. I don't want to have real big pieces of onion. So I'm going to leave that core in and peel it. Now, like any recipe, like any of the stuff that I make, we're not baking here. It's not totally science. So if you don't like onion, don't add onion. It's not a big deal, but I think it adds a lot to the recipe. But I'm going to try and dice this very fine. And we'll use about that much of it. And I'll reserve this for something else. So I'm going to turn this, cut perpendicular. All right, so we've got some nice fine diced onion. I'm also going to use a shallot. So a shallot is actually related to an onion. You could use one or the other. You don't necessarily need to use both, but I have both, so I'm going to use them. But I'm going to treat this kind of like an onion initially. Yeah, this one actually is all one piece. So I'm going to treat it exactly like I treated that onion. But a shallot's a member of the onion family, like I said, but it has a flavor that's kind of a cross between an onion and garlic. They're great. They're a little bit more mild, a little bit more complex. So we're going to do the same thing here. Oftentimes they're kind of like a head of garlic where when you open it up, there's a couple little bulbs inside, but this happened to be all one big bulb. All right, so that's all ready. I want to take a peek here at my spinach and just see how we're doing. All right, we're just starting to wilt down. You see all that steam coming off? That's a lot of that moisture. We're going to, like I said, we're going to drain that off, but at this point, we want to let that steam stay in there so that it cooks down our shallots. Our spinach, excuse me. So nutmeg. So this is a whole piece of nutmeg. Now, anytime you can get a spice and you can get it in its whole form. It's going to taste not completely different, but it's going to blow your mind how different it tastes than if you're getting the part that's already ground up in the jar. As soon as you open that jar, oxygen's getting in there. It's starting to change the flavor of that. So anytime you can get the whole thing and grate it yourself, it makes a huge difference. Speaking of grating it yourself, this is real Parmigiano-Reggiano cheese. It's very expensive. It's outstanding. And I'm not saying it's very expensive to brag, but this is a lot more than if you go and get the little thing of the shaker cheese at the store, but it goes a lot farther. Buy a hunk of this, go to a reputable cheesemonger and let them pick out a piece that's perfect for you and cut it to just the size you want. We're going to grate this and add some of this to it. One of the things I wanted to mention about the Parmigiano-Reggiano is the rind. It always has this rind that's stamped, and it doesn't have the best texture, but it doesn't really fall apart. This is awesome to take the rind after you've done with the rest of the cheese and throw it in a bolognese sauce, to throw it in, any sort of sauce. You just pull it out afterwards, but it lends such great flavor. Now you can see this thing's steaming like crazy now. Beautiful, beautiful. All right, we're gonna give that just a quick second. And then I'm gonna set up to drain. So I just have a glass bowl, and I have this fancy colander here. And I just want to take this, and now I'm going to add it to here. And as it sits here, it's going to continue cooking a bit. And we're going to let any liquid that's in there drain off. So we're going to take a couple minutes, let some of this liquid drain out. We'll come back, we'll finish this up, we'll check out what's going on in the oven, and we'll get Arthur up here for a taste. Hey, Arthur.
Hey, Matt. How are you?
Excellent.
Welcome back.
Thanks again for having me here at Hudson Appliance. Today was all about apples.
Apples, okay.
All right? We found some apples in my neighbor's yard, and that was actually the inspiration for the show. So we made this beautiful Waldorf salad. It's a salad of a couple different varieties of apples with some walnuts, some celery, and a little bit of mayonnaise to hold it together, essentially. Roasted some potatoes. Now check this out. Here are beautiful, beautiful roasted pork chops. I'm going to stick one of these up here like this. This other one, they're bone in. We're just going to stand those up, just kind of like that.
Incredible.
Here we've got roasted apples and onions with a little bit of bourbon in there. So we're going to put some of this right on top.
Now the bourbon, when you cook that, does it the alcohol come out of it?
The bulk of the alcohol goes out. There's still a little bit in there, but it's not very much. Then I'm actually going to take our pan here. I'm going to add a little bit of butter to it. Just room temperature butter. I'm going to whisk this into the little bit of juices that's in here. And that's all right that there's a little onion and apple in there.
Those red potatoes, is that salt on the outside?
Salt and pepper, a little bit of oil, that's it. Very simple.
Good.
And that's it. So we just made a really quick pan sauce, and I'm just going to pour this right over the pork like this. Last thing we have, some creamed spinach.
Oh, that's one of my favorites.
So here's a beautiful family-style dinner for 3 or 4 people here with all this pork and all this other stuff. We're going to go ahead and give it a try, see what you like. I'll cut a little piece of pork here.
That salad is delicious.
Isn't it? Nice crunch.
Really, really
It's
good.
a great way to use up some apples.
Wow.
And there's a little piece of pork if you want to try it.
Yeah, I'm going to definitely try the pork.
So the days are gone of having to cook pork forever. The FDA now actually says you can actually cook pork safely to 145 degrees. So you don't have to cook it until it's actually a piece of shoe leather. It's all right to have a little pink in it. What do you think?
Oh, excellent, excellent. I'm going to take a second one. I
So
love it
good.
So much.
We'll try a little bit of the spinach. What do you think of that?
Now, that's
Wicked good.